It's empty in the valley of your heart. The sun, it rises slowly as you walk away from all the fears and all the faults you've left behind. The harvest left no food for you to eat. You cannibal, you meat eater, you see. But I have seen the same, I know the shame in your defeat.
Part 2. The Origins of Agriculture. The origins of agriculture are uncertain because they occurred before written history. Based on archaeological evidence and also anthropological evidence of current people like Papua New Guineans, we can make a pretty good guess about how these people lived. Before the invention of agriculture, all humans obtained the food they needed for survival through hunting for animals, fishing, or gathering of plants. This is called hunting and gathering. Not very creative, but it's a name. Some of what we know about hunter-gatherers comes from people that still live the hunter-gatherer lifestyle today. Most people on Earth eat food that they produce themselves or was produced for them. Some people hunt and gather occasionally. Only about 250,000 people still hunt and gather exclusively, and they all live on the periphery. We also know about hunter-gatherers from archaeology. We can study their bodies, look at their bones, and find evidence about how they lived and what kind of diseases they may have had. Hunter-gatherers were nomadic people that followed the natural movements of herds and the seasonal growth of plants over seasons. They lived in small groups and used tools like sticks, baskets, weapons, and fire. Because they moved often, they didn't have a lot of possessions. Finding food took up only about 10% of their time, so contrary to some people's beliefs, they did have plenty of free time. Men typically hunted and fished, but women gathered roots, berries, nuts, and fruit. This division of labor sounds like a stereotype, but is based on evidence from archaeology and anthropology. In fact, women were considered very important, as gathering accounted for about 60 to 80% of the food that they would eat. So how did agriculture begin? People had to transform their lifestyles from nomadic people who roamed the earth to sedentary lifestyles, people who settled down. So how did agriculture really begin? The answer is domestication. Domestication is a process, the result of selective breeding. It took a very long time. It likely began when useful plants were protected by humans. They protected plants that taste good or had good qualities like long fibers to make clothing with. Protecting plants led to deliberate planting. They selected seeds and shoots from only the best plants and kept inferior plants from cross-pollinating with them. Most experts believe repeated domestication occurred at different times and at different locations. What is a domesticated plant? A domesticated plant is a plant that is deliberately cared for by humans. Domesticated plants are genetically different from wild plants. They tend to produce larger and more abundant crops. They also tend to grow larger. An example would be wild Indian maize that grew on a cob less than an inch long, compared to the corn that we have now. There are two competing theories for how agriculture started. Some people believe it was an accident, and some people believe that it happened on purpose. Most likely it was a combination of both. First, we'll look at the cultural progress hypothesis, which says that planting was intentional. It states that once humans understood agriculture, they used it as a part of the natural progression of evolution from wild to more civilized. The hypothesis states that they knew how to develop better plants by selecting for them. The hypothesis assumes that agricultural life is superior to foraging, but that's debatable, as hunter-gatherers lived a pretty good lifestyle. The second theory is that it happened accidentally, and that is called the coevolution hypothesis. It believes that farming began as an accident. Humans believe that cut plants and seeds grew new plants and began to cultivate these plants. Plants began to change into domestic varieties on their own because of the human interaction. So basically, They were doing these things but didn't realize what they were actually doing or the science behind it. Once humans domesticated plants, they began domesticating animals. A domestic animal is one that is dependent on humans for food and shelter. The first animals to be domesticated are believed to have first come into contact with humans by eating their garbage and leftovers. By repeatedly seeing humans and being around them on a daily basis, they became more friendly with them. Through controlled breeding and daily contact, humans eventually domesticated these animals. Animals were very important to people. They provided protection. They helped with hunting. They provided meat, milk, skin, fur, and also labor. It is also believed that cows and some birds were also kept for religious reasons, so animals were very important in the development of agriculture. Here's a timeline for the domestication of animals. Some animals can't be domesticated or aren't practical to be domesticated. Elephants, for example, take too long to grow up. Zebras and foxes are too skittish. Some animals like antelopes and pandas need way too much territory in order to breed, so it is not practical to raise them in captivity. That's the end of part 2. In part 3, we're going to look at the hearth and diffusion of this agriculture.